The thing about the Northern Pack territories, especially the neutral meeting grounds where different packs gathered for council sessions, was that nothing ever went smoothly. Not the territorial negotiations, not the trade agreements, and definitely not the days when some Alpha King decided to bring his family along. Sarah had been working as a mediator at the crossroads for 3 months now, which made her practically a veteran by Omega standards and an absolute anomaly by everyone else's. She'd learned quickly that keeping your head down, your records updated, and your sense of humor intact were the 3 keys to survival. The 4th key, which nobody mentioned during training, was not panicking when things went sideways. Things were about to go very, very sideways. Meditation Hall 3. We have a situation, crackled through her comm, and Sarah looked up from the treaty documents she'd been organizing. The voice belonged to Marcus, one of the Beta security chiefs, and Betas didn't get rattled easily. This one sounded rattled. Define situation, Sarah replied, already moving toward the hall. Around her, the usual organized chaos of the crossroads continued. Wolves from a dozen different packs moving between meeting rooms, voices raised in negotiation, the scent of various pack territories mingling in ways that made sensitive noses twitch. Containment failure on the Nightfang delegation. The Alpha King's cub escaped. Sarah broke into a run. How old? There was a pause that lasted just a hair too long. 3 years old. Oh, fantastic. The Alpha heirs at 3 were what happened when you combined pure dominant bloodline, 0 impulse control, and enough natural power to make grown warriors nervous. They were also, to be fair, generally sweet kids, which is exactly what you'd expect from pups who'd never known a real threat. Their wolf instincts, however, were a different story. Sarah rounded the corner into Hall 3 and immediately understood why Marcus had sounded concerned. The hall had cleared out faster than a building on fire, mediators scrambling behind furniture, security forming a wide perimeter, everyone treating this like a crisis. In the center of the chaos, near the Nightfang delegation's private chamber, with its door hanging open at an unfortunate angle, was the cause of all this panic. The Alpha Cub was, by the standards of his bloodline, absolutely adorable. By the standards of literally everyone else in the territories, he was a snarling ball of midnight black fur, roughly the size of a large wolf pup, with eyes that glowed molten gold and tiny fangs bared in what he probably thought was a terrifying display. He was also clearly terrified, ears flat, body language screaming fear, that distinctive whimper growl pups made when they were trying to be brave but really just wanted their parents. Security had shock poles out, but weren't approaching, which told Sarah everything she needed to know about how this was going. The cub's head swiveled, tracking movement, and Sarah could practically see his little wolf brain calculating threats. He was scared, which made sense. Strange place, strange scents, loud noises, no parents in sight. The fact that he was an Alpha heir specifically designed by bloodline to respond to fear with dominance displays was just unfortunate timing. Nobody move, Sarah said quietly, which was probably pointless considering everyone was already frozen. The cub's golden eyes locked onto her, the only person still walking toward him instead of away. His haunches bunched, tiny claws digging into marble floor. And then he launched himself directly at her legs with a puppy growl that would have been adorable if it weren't accompanied by very real baby fangs. What happened next would be analyzed, debated, and retold in pack stories for years. Sarah didn't scream, didn't run, didn't even flinch. Instead, she dropped into a crouch, opened her arms, and caught roughly 60 pounds of claws and puppy fury mid-leap, with timing that would have impressed any mother. The cub hit her with enough force to make her grunt, but Sarah had grown up in a pack with 7 younger siblings. She knew how to handle scared pups. She absorbed the impact, let momentum carry her in a half spin, and ended up with an armful of extremely confused Alpha air. "Gotcha," Sarah said, grinning, and then, because apparently today was the day her Omega instincts decided to completely override common sense, she spun around again, holding the cub like he was a particularly squirmy toddler. "Whoa, you've got some serious hops there, little Alpha." The cub, who'd been prepared for either submission or a fight, made a sound that started as a growl and somehow transformed mid-note into a questioning whine. His tiny claws, which had been extended for combat, slowly retracted. the snarling stopped. And then, this was the part that would later be described as biologically impossible and definitely against protocol. The cub started purring. The sound was less like a regular pup and more like a small motor, a deep rumbling that Sarah could feel vibrating through her chest. But it was unmistakably contentment. "There we go," Sarah said, scratching behind one of his ears. "You're not so scary, are you? Just got a little spooked. Happens to the best of us." The silence in Meditation Hall 3 was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. She looked up to find approximately 30 different wolves from a dozen packs staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to horror to what might have been religious awakening. Yet Marcus had his mouth hanging open. One of the mediators had apparently frozen mid-climb up a decorative pillar and was still hanging there. Sarah said. "Someone want to tell me where this little guy's parents are?" As if summoned by the question, the delegation chamber's main door burst open, and 2 wolves in human form emerged at a speed that suggested they'd been trying to override the security locks. The male was massive, even in human form, easily 6'5", with the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. He wore formal alpha regalia, dark leather and silver that screamed royalty. His eyes, burning molten gold, locked onto the scene with an intensity that made every wolf in the room instinctively lower their gaze. The female beside him was slightly smaller, but moved with deadly grace, in her expression cycling through panic, relief, and something that looked like she was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. They were also both radiating the kind of parental terror that transcended rank. "Where is—" the male alpha started, then stopped dead as he spotted Sarah standing in the middle of the hall, still holding their son like a slightly oversized puppy. The cub, hearing his father's voice, perked up and made a happy yipping sound that was absolutely at odds with the fact that he could probably bite through bone if he wanted to. "Oh, thank the moon," the female breathed, and her voice carried relief so profound it made Sarah's chest ache in sympathy. She crossed the distance in 3 impossibly long strides. And suddenly Sarah found herself being loomed over by an alpha queen who could absolutely snap her in half without breaking a sweat. For just a second, some very old and very smart part of Sarah's omega hindbrain, the part that had kept her ancestors alive, suggested that maybe she should be concerned. She told that part of her brain to hush and smiled up at the towering she-wolf. "Your little alpha's got some impressive hops," Sarah said, gently transferring the cub to his mother's arms. "Might want to check those security locks. The automatic ones can be finicky." The female alpha took her son with the kind of careful reverence usually reserved for live explosives. The cub immediately tried to climb onto her head, yipping happily. The male alpha was staring at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read, somewhere between confused and having his entire worldview rearranged. "You," he started, then paused. "You caught him?" "Well, yeah," Sarah said. "What else was I supposed to do? Let him tackle me? That seemed rude." "He was attacking." "He was scared," Sarah corrected, watching the cub now happily perched on his mother's shoulders. "There's a difference. Scared pups just need to know they're safe." She brushed some black fur off her meditation robes. "Usually works better than shock poles and shouting." The male alpha opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at his mate with an expression that clearly said, "Are you seeing this too? Or am I having a stroke?" The female was studying Sarah with an intensity usually reserved for interesting threats. "You're omega," she said, not quite a question. "Last time I checked, yeah." "And you regularly handle dominant pups?" Sarah thought about growing up in a pack with 7 younger siblings, about volunteering at the orphaned pup sanctuary, about that memorable summer working with rescued ferals. "I mean," she said, "not exclusively dominant pups, but yeah, kind of comes with the territory when you're the oldest of 8. Marcus finally found his voice. She caught an alpha air mid-attack like it was a recreational activity. "He's just a kid," Sarah said. "Kids do dumb stuff when they're scared. Pretty universal, right?" The male alpha made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "I am Kale Nightfang," he said, apparently deciding formal introductions were necessary. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories. This is my mate, Queen Lyra." He paused, watching his son attempt to groom his mother's hair. "And our son, who just attempted to maul you, is currently unnamed. He's adorable," Sarah said, and meant it. What do you mean, unnamed? Another one of those pauses that suggested Sarah had stumbled into cultural significance she didn't understand. Alpha heirs receive their names after their first shift, Kale said carefully. Until then, he's simply ours. Huh, that's actually really cool. Sarah glanced at the cub, who was now chewing on his mother's hair. Well, until then, maybe keep a better eye on him, as these neutral ground security systems can be glitchy. She turned to head back to her actual job. The treaty documents weren't going to file themselves, but Lyra's voice stopped her. Omega Sarah. Sarah turned back. Just Sarah's fine. You weren't afraid. It was a statement, not a question, but Sarah heard the real question underneath. Sure I was, Sarah said honestly. Fear's not the problem. It's what you do with it that matters. She grinned. Plus, I've wrestled feral pups that were meaner than your little guy. He's all bluster. The cub, as if understanding his reputation was being challenged, puffed up and tried to look threatening while still perched on his mother's head. The effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that he was now tangled in her hair. Sarah laughed, waved, and headed back to her workstation. And behind her, she left a hall full of stunned wolves and one very confused royal family. It would be another hour before someone thought to check the security footage. By the time the footage spread through the pack networks, showing an Omega catching an Alpha King's heir mid-leap, spinning around while laughing, then handing him back like she was returning borrowed property, Sarah's life was about to get very, very complicated. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in the territories isn't fighting alphas, it's treating them like they're not terrifying at all. The video hit the pack networks like wildfire. Within 6 hours, Sarah's impromptu pup wrangling had been viewed 3 million times across 18 different territorial feeds. By the time she finished her shift and stumbled back to her quarters, she had 86 messages waiting. Interview requests, commentary from pack historians she'd never heard of. At least a dozen messages her translator marked as cultural context unclear, possibly mating proposals. What the hell? She muttered, scrolling through increasingly frantic notifications. The next morning, she found out exactly what had happened when she walked into her supervisor's office and found not her supervisor, but the Crossroads diplomatic liaison, a harried-looking beta named Vex. You're famous, he said without preamble. I'm what now? Vex pulled up a holographic display, and there it was. Sarah, frozen mid-spin, holding what the caption described as Alpha King heir, Nightfang bloodline. Like she was dancing with an enthusiastic partner. The view counter was climbing so fast the numbers blurred. Oh, Sarah said. Oh no. Oh yes, Vex replied. The Nightfang Embassy has received 300 requests for comment. The Omega Rights Council wants to study you. And someone from the Silverfang Collective called you either insane or the most dangerous Omega in known territories. He paused. Which is apparently a compliment. Sarah sat down heavily. I just didn't want the pup to get hurt. You caught an attacking alpha heir mid-leap and laughed about it, Vex said, something like awe in his voice. Do you understand what that looks like to packs who've spent centuries maintaining strict rank protocols? Before Sarah could answer, her comm chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender ID made Vex's eyes widen. Ag Alpha King Kyle Nightfang. The message was brief. Omega Sarah. My family would be honored if you would join us for private dinner this evening. We have questions about your pack's approach to dominant young. Please bring documentation of these 7 siblings you mentioned. Sarah looked at Vex. Vex looked at Sarah. Your supervisor cleared you for diplomatic duties, he said quietly. Apparently this is now considered vital to territorial relations. I just work mediation, Sarah protested weakly. You worked mediation, Vex corrected. Now you're apparently an ambassador to every alpha who has pups. 6 hours later, Sarah found herself in the Crossroads Royal Quarter, wearing her nicest clothes, which wasn't saying much, carrying a tablet loaded with pictures from home. Pictures of her chaotic pack house, 7 younger siblings in various states of mischief. That time, her baby brother shifted for the first time and got stuck halfway. The rescued feral pups her mother somehow always ended up fostering. Alpha King Kyle opened the door personally, and Sarah's breath caught because seeing him in formal delegation mode was one thing. Seeing him in casual evening clothes, with that burning gold gaze focused entirely on her, was something else entirely. He was overwhelming, in the best and most terrifying way. "Welcome," Kyle said, his voice like whiskey and smoke. "I should warn you, word spread quickly about our invitation. Several other alphas requested to attend." He paused, something that might have been amusement flickering in those molten eyes. This might be a long night. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside. He has absolutely no idea that by the end of the evening she'd have accidentally challenged 3 Alpha Kings to a dominance display, impressed 2 warrior queens, and somehow ended up agreeing to help Kale with his son's training. But that, as they say, was a problem for future Sarah. The dining room was less a room and more a carefully orchestrated exercise in territorial diplomacy, which meant it looked like someone had tried to accommodate 6 different alpha bloodlines, and mostly succeeded. Sarah counted 9 wolves around the table, and every single one of them was staring at her like she was either a fascinating anomaly or had just grown a second head. "Right," she said, settling into her chair between Kyle and Lyra. "So, this is happening. Kyle, you who smelled like pine and winter storms and something uniquely him that made Sarah's Omega instincts do complicated things, gestured around the table. Allow me to make introductions." To Sarah's left was Alpha Thorn of the Eastern Ranges, grizzled, battle-scarred, looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Beside him, Alpha Queen Mira of the Coastal Pax, elegant and sharp-eyed, and to her right, directly across from Kale, was Battlemaster Ronan of the Warrior Clans, 6'6" of pure muscle, with scars that told stories and eyes that evaluated her like she was a combat scenario. "So," Mira said, her voice melodic but carrying authority, "is it true that Omegas in your pack regularly handle dominant pups?" Sarah pulled out her tablet. "Oh yeah, super common. Here, so let me show you." She pulled up pictures of pack gatherings, of her mother wrangling multiple shifted pups at once, of Sarah herself at 16, bottle-feeding 3 orphaned alpha pups whose parents had died in a rogue attack. "We don't really separate by rank when it comes to pup care," Sarah explained. "Everyone helps raise the young. It's just how packs work where I'm from." The silence that followed suggested that no, actually, that was not how most packs worked. "Fascinating," Thorn rumbled. "The Eastern Ranges maintain strict rank-based childcare. Alphas train alpha pups. The concept of an Omega handling dominant young is dangerous," Ronan finished. His voice was like gravel. "Or it should be." "Should be," Sarah agreed. "But pups are pups. They respond to confidence and calm. Not rank." She swiped to another picture, herself at 19, covered in mud, grinning while 3 massive alpha teenagers play-wrestled around her. "These are my younger brothers," she said. "All alphas, all complete disasters at that age. But they listened to me because I was the one who made sure they ate and didn't kill each other." Kale, who'd been watching her intently, leaned closer. "And they accepted your authority?" "I mean, they tried challenging me exactly once each." Sarah grinned at the memory. "Then they learned that rank doesn't mean much when your big sister knows all your embarrassing secrets and controls the snack cabinet." Lyra laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound broke some of the tension in the room. "I like her," the Queen announced. "Kyle, we're keeping her." Sarah blinked. "Keeping me?" "As a consultant," Kale said smoothly, but his eyes held heat that had nothing to do with professional interest. "Our son clearly responds to you, and I find myself curious about your methods." The way he said curious made Sarah's skin tingle. "I'm just a mediator," she protested. "You caught my heir mid-attack and made him purr," Kale said, voice dropping lower. "That's not just anything." Around the table, knowing looks were being exchanged, but it was Ronan who voiced what everyone was clearly thinking. "You realize what this looks like, don't you?" What looks like?" Sarah asked. "An Omega who can handle an Alpha King's heir without submission or fear," Ronan said. "Who treats dominance like it's irrelevant." He smiled, showing teeth. "You just became the most eligible Omega in 3 territories." Sarah's eyes went wide. I'm sorry, what? But Kale's expression had gone carefully neutral, which somehow made him even more intimidating. Ronan, he said quietly, is not wrong. His golden eyes locked with Sarah's. Though I would appreciate if the rest of the territories remembered that my family extended this dinner invitation first. The possessive edge in his tone made something in Sarah's chest flutter. I'm just here to, she floundered. To help with our son, Lyra said smoothly, though her smile suggested she knew exactly what was happening. Of course, that's why we invited you, she paused. Though I should mention, our son has been asking about the Laughing Lady non-stop since this morning. He's quite taken with you. He's 3, Sarah said weakly. Yes, Kyle agreed, and Alpha heirs bond early and intensely. The way he said it, the way he looked at her, suggested they weren't just talking about his son anymore. So, Mira said, breaking the tension with Alpha Queen efficiency, tell us more about these 7 siblings. I'm particularly interested in how your pack structures childcare across ranks. The dinner lasted 4 hours. By the end, Sarah had accidentally started 2 diplomatic incidents, something about suggesting alphas could learn emotional regulation from omegas, impressed 3 different alphas with her stories of managing pack chaos, and somehow ended up agreeing to spend the next 3 days helping Kale with his son's socialization training. When she finally stumbled back toward her quarters, her comm buzzed. Lieutenant Bo, the only other mediator from her home pack currently at the crossroads, sounded frantic. Please tell me you didn't just agree to private training sessions with Alpha King Nightfang. How did you already know about that? Sarah, everyone knows. It's been on the territorial feeds for 20 minutes. They're taking bets on how long before he claims you. Claims Bo, it's just pup training. Right, and the way he looked at you in that footage is just professional interest. Bo's sigh was long-suffering. You're going to give every Omega in 3 territories hope, and every Alpha a heart attack. I'm just being myself. I know. That's what's terrifying. 3 days later, Sarah stood in Nightfang's private training grounds, watching a 3-year-old Alpha heir attempt to shift for the 20th time and end up as a confused ball of half-fur, half-skin chaos. And behind her, close enough that she could feel his body heat, Kale Nightfang observed with an intensity that had nothing to do with his son's progress. You're staring, Sarah said without turning around. I'm observing, Kale corrected, voice rumbling through her bones. There's a difference. Uh-huh. A pause, then quieter. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? An Omega who submitted, who followed protocol, who was afraid of you. Another pause. Yes. Sarah finally turned to face him, and found herself nearly chest to chest with an Alpha King whose eyes were burning molten gold. I grew up in a pack with 7 Alpha siblings, she said softly. Fear doesn't keep you safe. Understanding does. And do you understand me, Omega Sarah? The way he said her name, like a prayer and a challenge combined, made her breath catch. I'm starting to, she whispered. Kale's hand came up, stopping just short of touching her face. May I? The fact that he asked, that an Alpha King asked, made something in Sarah's chest crack open. Yes. His fingers brushed her cheek and Sarah shivered at the contact. My son isn't the only one who's been asking about you, Kyle murmured. I find myself distracted. Is that so? Dangerously so. Behind them, the cub yipped triumphantly. He'd finally managed a full shift. Yet neither of them looked away. Have dinner with me, Kale said. Just the 2 of us. No diplomatic pretense. That sounds suspiciously like a date. Would that be so terrible? Sarah thought about protocols, about rank differences, about every reason this was probably a terrible idea. Then she thought about golden eyes and careful hands and an Alpha King who asked permission. No, she said. Not terrible at all. Kale's smile was devastating, and somewhere in the territories, the betting pools went absolutely insane. Because the Omega who caught an Alpha heir mid-leap while laughing had just caught something far more dangerous. The attention of a king who was learning that sometimes the strongest wolves were the ones who never needed to prove it, and that love, like catching scared pups, was all about timing. Trust and knowing when to hold on tight.